Afternoon, Manan, Partha, and good afternoon, everyone who is joining us. Salam here, Mustafa. Okay, so we see that a lot of friends, they're joining us through Zoom, through Instagram Live, and through Facebook Live. So we will start our evening as discussed. I would like to, this is our 12th second event as one of our virtual events. And I'm very happy and honored to have today with us is Abdul Manan Bhat and Partha P. Chakrabarty. So Manan and I met Manan, I think Manan, things were quite normal 3 months ago. We met at Penn. We had a panel there with a panel at Penn regarding Kashmir, and then I heard him, and I must say that I just felt like he should continue to talk and he should never stop speaking. The voice was beautiful and the poetry was absolutely beautiful. So we decided about to do an event together on March 19th, but unfortunately we couldn't do it. So we decided let's just continue with this event and kind of bring it to virtual event. So I won't talk too much. I just wanted to so today's our topic for the event is Poetry as Farhad's Dagger, Hope in Our Times, and poetry reading and discussion on translation poetry and semantics and fidelity. If you have any questions, please send us through chat. Jamal, Mir, Mustafa, thank you so much for joining us. And I see Brooke, Laura, Ishani, Fida, thank you so much, all of you. And I will be reading your messages. I will be taking all the notes. If you have any questions, please send us through, even through Instagram, through chat. And thank you so much, Manan and Partha. From here, please continue your conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good evening and afternoon and morning to everyone that has joined us. I think we have participants from all over. It's afternoon where I am. I'm in LA. A lot of you are in Philly. Some of us are in India, I believe. I'd like to begin by thanking everyone here at 12 Gates Arts for putting this together and for letting us steal an hour from the lockdown to talk about poetry and to talk about hope. I want to say that the reason I'm starting the proceedings and not the poet himself is because I've only really taken up translation to introduce Manan's work to readers who don't read Urdu. So I'm playing the same role today as well as someone introducing his work to all of you. Our plan for the next hour, we hope, is a good blend of structure and spontaneity. I'm hoping to do a middle point between a Narendra Modi press conference, which is completely stage managed, and a Donald Trump press conference, which is completely, off the cuff. The structure will be provided by 4 of Manan's poems, where Manan will read the Urdu, followed by me reading the English translation. We also have a poem by Kaifi Azmi, where the roles will be reversed. I don't know if we'll have time for that, but we'll try and put it in. And we'll discuss each poem after it has been read and see where the conversation leads us. I wanted to begin by speaking of the title for this talk. When Manan conveyed this invitation to me over video call, and this is something that happens a lot with Manan, he also had a new ghazal to read to me. So fresh, a taza ghazal, as they say. When I heard the ghazal, I realized that one sher in it would actually make for a really good title, and that sher refers to the story of Farhad, the Kuh Khan, or mountain breaker, who carved a mountain, or koh, for the sake of the love of his life, Shireen. And the only thing he had to break this mountain was a little dagger called a tesha. So here today, we will present, to start things off, this never seen before ghazal, presenting Tare Gar Na Chamke by Abdul Manan Bhat Alam in his own voice.
Thank you so much. Partha, and thank you so much, Aisha and Atif and everybody who's watching. This is really fantastic. So I won't bore you with any of the prose that I will come up with. So I'll just straight away start with the ghazal and then we get to discussing it. So this ghazal, as Partha said, is Sitare Gar Na Chamke. And I'll read the Urdu and then Partha will read his fabulous translation. सितारे गर न चमके हम ये दिल अपना जलाएंगे, सितारे गर न चमके हम ये दिल अपना जलाएंगे, किसी सूरत भी हम इस रात को अपना बनाएंगे, किसी सूरत भी हम इस रात को अपना बनाएंगे, इसी सहराए हिजरत के इन्हीं खस्ता दयारों में, इसी सहराए हिजरत के इन्हीं खस्ता दयारों में, जुनूं की रह गुजर पे हम भी घर अपना बनाएंगे, जुनूं की रह गुजर पे हम भी घर अपना बनाएंगे। हमारा हुस्न है कि हमको आता है बिखर जाना, हमारा हुस्न है कि हमको आता है बिखर जाना, हमारे हुस्न से ये बाग भी क्या लहलहाएंगे,
जबरदस्त।
हमारे हुस्न से ये बाग भी क्या लहलहाएंगे। And now the title says, मिला जब कोहकन हमको तो हमने ये कहा उससे, मिला जब कोहकन हमको तो हमने ये कहा उससे कि अब पेशा नहीं एक ख्वाब से कुह को गिराएंगे, पेशा नहीं एक ख्वाब से कुह को गिराएंगे। अभी तो वस्ल की बातें हमारी जानो ईमा हैं, अभी तो वस्ल की बातें हमारी जानो ईमा हैं, मगर मालूम है हमको कि दिल अपना दुखाएंगे, मगर मालूम है हमको कि दिल अपना दुखाएंगे। जो तुम ना आओगे महशर में हमसे रूबरू होने, जो तुम ना आओगे महशर में हमसे रूबरू होने, तो ये दागे मोहब्बत हम भला किसको दिखाएंगे, तो ये दागे मोहब्बत हम भला किसको दिखाएंगे। एंड इसका मकता लास्ट लाइन लास्ट शेर इज, सुना है कत्ल होने का हुनर आता बड़ा तुमको, सुना है कत्ल होने का हुनर आता बड़ा तुमको, अलम आओ बतेगे सद जफा हम आजमाएंगे। Thank you. And now over to Partha, whose fantastic translation I am dying to hear actually. Again.
If the stars fail to glimmer, it is our hearts that we'll ignite. Whatever comes ahead of us, we will reclaim this night. Anointed as we are by exile, in our landscapes of pain, our zeal shines a pathway. In this we will reside. Our gift lies in knowing how to shatter with grace. This gift will spur gardens redolent with life. My dear Farhad, in the breaking of this mountain, keep away your dagger, our poems will suffice. Though we cannot live without our dreams of reunion, not once have we forgotten that pain is our birthright. If on the day of judgment you are not by my side, to whom will I show the scars this love leaves behind? Now 100 sword gashes put your boasts to the test. Long have we heard that Alam excels in sacrifice.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, Partha. Amazing. This is wonderful.
What draws me to Manan's work is the hope I find in it. In this ghazal, Manan invokes a hum which absorbs in the Urdu both the subjective I and the intersubjective we. You say, "Hamara husn hai ki humko aata hai bikhar jana," or "Our gift lies in knowing how to shatter with grace." It seems to me that you're drawing your hope not just from yourself, but from a community of people who have the same gift. Jinko aata hai bikhar jana. Can you share a little bit about who this we is that you're invoking?
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on this because it is more or less to me a conscious choice. I don't write in the first person, so I don't write the muj or the me. I mean, it's very and partly I don't know. Partly it is because of the poets that I've read. So, for example, someone who's had great influence on me is Fez, and Fez rarely ever used the we. In fact, he was asked the same question actually. There's an archival interview, and so at the risk of copying his answer, I think the multiplicity of the we. My issue with the I is, I, as Julia Kristeva said, I is at best an approximation, and at worst it's it's an abduction. So there's a same concretization that happens with I, and one could argue it happens with we too. But To me, just aesthetically and the meaning that the aesthetic of hum, especially in Urdu, hum carries or we carries, its helm is quite wide. As you would say, there is a lot of multiplicity that I feel that it can accommodate. It can accommodate a series of pains, and various valences and iterations of pain and desire both. And so this hum, sometimes people have pointed out to me when I recite that the hum seems to, are you only talking about Kashmir? Or are you only talking about a certain iteration of pain? And I would like to think that that's not the case. I mean, there is a certain context from which the hum emerges or from which the we emerges. But I feel it's an ever expansive category that instead of in our modern times how we've thought of the we as very close, but I think I make the attempt that the we or the hum that features in this share or in other shares, it points to our fragmentation, but it also points to a sort of, we're all, let's say, in Marquez's words, we're all inhabitants of the kingdom of love in some sense, right? So yeah, so that would be, that would.
Yeah. Which actually brings me to the very next question that I had for you. It's very closely linked, that we also in our title used hope in our times, and the times was plural, right? Times in the plural. So on the one hand, there is so much happening around the world, and there is a multiplicity of dark times right now, even as Trump botches up the coronavirus response here in the US. The pandemic is being used to further create communal tensions in India.
Right.
So there are all of these, dark times happening simultaneously. But in an earlier conversation, you mentioned that during this time, weirdly, the many different times seem to start to mirror each other.
Right.
And of course, as people who know exile, we always operate in double time, right? There's a time home and there's a time over here, and we're constantly aware of both strands, sort of. So,
right.
but what is this period like for you in the time of the pandemic?
Yeah, and so I should tell the listeners. So it was Partha's idea to take the share and then turn it into a title and use the word times, and I was quite happy with this, and this sort of reflects our earlier conversation, because the multiplicity of times and people who have left places, and I honestly even think if you're not even you don't have to be in exile to experience multiplicity of times. Time is a very tricky concept, as we know, but also in terms of the particular thing that you pointed out, which was that like, let's say the people who are in exile are the people who have left their homes, and there is a time, there are at least two times, but I would even go farther and say that there is a multiplicity of times, right? I mean, there's always an imagined time for anyone who's left anywhere, right? If you left somewhere, there is an imagined time, and there is a futurity to it, and so you're already dwelling in the time that you've embodied, in the time that you're separated from, and then in sort of a time which you imagine for a future. So which is why I thought that hope in our times, rather than our time, captured what we're all going through. I would assume. Also being from Kashmir, lockdowns are not anything new. So, this is something interesting my mother mentioned to me the other day. She was like, this is not that different actually. And that speaks to something. And that's where I thought that there is a certain mirroring happening, right? There's a certain, it's almost as if you see yourself or you see a time in a mirror and you realize that you've seen this before. And there's a familiarity and there's a mirroring, but you're always aware of that mirroring. Right? They don't entirely mesh into a singular time, but they give you the feeling of a compendium, of a complex, right? So while there is no enmeshing of time such that they lose their own idiosyncrasies, but there is, to me, a certain mirroring. Yes. And well, I'd like to know what you think about this. Since you suggested the title that it should be time.
Yeah, I mean it's really about for me the question is how to endure, how to endure through these various things. And in so many ways, we are also seeing that these various times are linked to each other. It's not like, that, I mean, if we are talking about Islamophobia in India, that cannot be separated from Islamophobia in the US and the war on terror, etc. So we definitely see that. And of course, our world leaders, I mean, Trump and Modi are apparently the only people the White House follows. The only politicians the White House follows is Narendra Modi and some other Indian politicians. So we can see this kind of hobnobbing, and the dark times are actually linked to each other and collaborating in these ways, and we have to respond in similarly collaborative ways.
Yeah.
Our next poem actually deals in part with the isolation of exile and how to confront it or how to grapple with it. Tanha nahi hai tu jaane ja.
Right. So Tanha nahi hai tu jaane ja, as opposed to a ghazal, is a nazm. It's a poem, so it's not in couplets, but instead it's in stanzas, just for people who will hear it said slightly differently. तन्हा नहीं है तू जाने जा, तन्हा नहीं है तू जाने जा, तेरे साथ शब का करार है, तेरे गेसुओं के फिराक में कई अंजुमों की कतार है, कई अब्र हैं सरे आसमां, कई दश्त ज़ेरे नकाब हैं, कई काफिले हैं थके थके, हर सिमत गम के सराब हैं, हर सिमत गम के सराब हैं, कुछ बस्तियां हैं हुस्न की जहां हिज्र के बीमार हैं, कई बेवफा हैं छुपे हुए, कई दोस्तों के मजार हैं, तेरी उंगलियों पे चले फिजा, नक्श पा में बसे सबा, तन्हा नहीं है तू जाने जा, तेरे साथ शब का करार है, तेरे गेसुओं के फिराक में कई अंजुमों की कतार है, इसी रोशनी में है जिंदगी, जरा जिंदगी से नजर मिला, जरा बात कर कुछ गुनगुना, मेरे दोस्त मेरे करीबा, तन्हा नहीं है तू जाने जा, तेरे साथ शब का करार है, तेरे गेसुओं के फिराक में कई अंजुमों की कतार है, कई अंजुमों की कतार है.
Wow.
Beautiful, Manan. Beautiful.
Very much. Thank you so much. Now to Partha. Yes, Partha, I'm eagerly waiting.
You are not alone, my dear. You are not alone, my dear. With you walks the peace of midnight, and nestled in the parting of your hair are strings of starlight. Clouds cluster overhead, deserts lurk behind veils, tired caravans trudge towards mirages of pain. Friends lie in graves, the faithless among us hide, yet beauty finds a home in those afflicted by exile. Your fingertips unravel even this dark time. Dawn settles in your footprints everywhere you stride. You are not alone, my dear. With you walks the peace of midnight, and nestled in the parting of your hair are strings of starlight. This light is the light that bursts with life. Come, beloved, let us lock eyes with life. Say something or hum a tune, my dear. Come to me, beloved, my friend, come near. You are not alone, my dear. With you walks the peace of midnight, and nestled in the parting of your hair are strings of starlight.
Wonderful, wonderful. Bahut shukriya. Thank you so much. It's amazing.
Beautiful.
And especially it's quite incredible to me how you maintain almost the rhythmic and almost the meter. I was telling him that I am almost envious that you're in English you're accomplishing what I have tried to even like do slightly in Urdu, and to do it in English is just it's borderline envious for me, which I've told him many times.
Manan, beautiful. And actually, Manan, for you and Partha, absolutely. And we are getting a lot of wah on Instagram and, of course, on this panel. I just wanted to forward that. And Partha, beautiful translations, as exactly Manan said, that, you're almost envious. Beautiful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Manan, I wanted to ask about the line, कई बस्तियां हैं हुस्न की जहां हिज्र के बीमार है, which I've translated, or perhaps more precisely mistranslated, as yet beauty finds a home in those afflicted by exile. In that stanza, you have painful imagery throughout: tired caravans, deserts, mirages of pain, dead friends and traitors. And yet in this stanza, husna, or beauty, is also present. What role do these counterpoints or exceptions play in your poems?
This is a very good question. And, first, to write an Urdu poem without the mention of husn is, it's a non-beginner. You can't even. So one is that, but no. But to seriously answer the question, again, not to resort to Marquez again, but Marquez is, he says that kingdom of love is not for the weak, and it is which is a very unforgiving kingdom. So when I was writing the poem, and I took some time to write this stanza, and the reason was that to me it seemed to me that even in the tide, why would a caravan move despite, and where is it going despite all that? Where is it going to, and why? What is the impetus for a caravan to move? Just like what is the impetus for us to keep on living in these hard situations, and even sort of leave, let's say, move from the place we are grown up and born and grown up and so on and so forth. What is the impetus for movement broadly, if one is to think about it? And I think husn, and I think when I say husn, I don't just mean physical beauty, but I mean the beauty as a concept and beauty as a driving force. Right? I think it gives you and it gives the poet and it gives anyone really the courage to imagine. It's the courage to imagine. It's the courage to keep living. So I think that is an interesting, that is an important conception of beauty that I try to, I've really inherited from the poets that I've read. That is one of the purposes of it. It doesn't mean things, you can have very deadly and almost ugly things, ugly realities looking you dead in the eye, but there has to be an impetus for movement, and I feel, and that is maybe somewhere where my attempt or my attitude towards maintaining a silver lining comes up, is that even in these there is a the exiled ones are restless, but they are restless in the city or in the cities of love or of beauty. And I think there is something imaginative that it does to me, at least, and it gives me the courage to imagine. This is the other thing from which a point I want to raise and actually have a question for you. So one of the things I remember when we were discussing this was the idea of effacement, and to me, effacement, because I my own research is in language, and Kristeva has this wonderful work on how language always effaces itself. That is just the nature of language. It always betrays and betrays. And in Urdu, if I were to say it, I when I was reading her work, I realized that in Urdu you could say that zaban bahut bewafa cheez hai. That language is a very almost it's unfaithful. Like it's unfaithful. It always betrays you. So that effacement that happens in language, I think that is almost to me compounded in poetry. The effacement is compounded in poetry because when I read a sher, especially in Urdu sher, which is first line, then I read the first line again, and then I read the second line. Right? By the time I come to the second line, the first line has erased. It's erased and it's effaced. But it's the trace of that effacement that comes back to you when you hear the second line and you make the connection between the two. So now my question to you would be that you are in a tricky position when you approach the translation, and not just mine, but anyone, is that, what is the balance to be struck between effacement of the translator and these numerous effacements that are going on, right? Because this idea of fidelity, which is also in the title, you have the idea of fidelity looming over you, but then there's also the problem of effacement that language as it is has, but then as a translator, I want to ask what is that effacement like? Does that make you nervous, and how does that effacement feature in the translation that you do?
That's a wonderful question. So the first thing that strikes me is actually, honestly, there is a pleasure also in effacement, in the sense that, so I'm the kind who's rather given to despair. So the opportunity to efface myself and my own responses to the situation, to inhabit a poem in which hope works in these ways, it's a pleasure. And I think it's a part of why we read, a part of why we create other worlds, is just to get out of ourselves at times. We don't want to be chained to the one life that we are leading. But when it comes to translation, you're right, effacement is also a responsibility, in the sense that, and for me, the way I look at it as a responsibility is that whenever we read a poem, there is our favorite reading, right? I mean, there is one reading that we privilege over the other readings.
Right.
But obviously, when translating, your effort has to be to try and convey these other readings, these other layers of meanings as well.
Right.
So in the first ghazal that we read today, the one with Farhad's Dagger, I sent it to a friend of mine, and that friend actually made salient the romantic parts of this ghazal, because Farhad's story at the end of the day is a love story. And I may be wrong, but I think that in your ghazals, the romantic is not just symbolic. Like, there is also some, you mean it sincerely at some levels as well. There is some romantic content in your ghazals as well. But for me, of course, this ghazal was primarily political. And so I had to be aware of the fact that that is the reading that I'm privileging, so that I don't suppress the other readings, so that I also do justice to the other readings. So that kind of effacement, where I have to negate my favorite reading to a certain extent, that's very important. But at the same time, I also know that that's in part a doomed project. Like, I'm never going to fully erase my commitment, or my commitment to a particular reading. So the way I think the best way to do effacement is to really say that this is not the translation. This is a translation. This is just one of many possible translations. And someone else's genius could refract this poem in a different way and come up with something beautiful. And I'm very happy. I would be very happy if that happened. And even when we read poems in our own languages, it's not like you said, even the act of reading actually creates an effacement as we go along. So when we have one meaning and then we have another meaning, it's not like the first meaning is erased, but by the end of it, a poem is a constellation of all of these different meanings.
And then there are traces, like you said, there are traces of these other readings that you've suppressed. But I think somehow there is a certain, in that act of erasure, that, I think they feature. They certainly do. And just to finish the point, that it reminds me of, so even the act of contemplation on any writing, particularly poetry, I think is almost a rewriting in itself. It's not a rewriting on the page, but it's a rewriting, right? I mean, even if you're reflecting on a certain thing, you're approaching it from a certain hermeneutical or numerous sorts of you're deploying numerous hermeneutics to sort of gauge meaning. I think that in itself it's a rewriting of sorts. So there's no escape from effacement, I feel, because language, I think, it has cast its net so wide and so sort of slyly that the effacement is just the part of that.
So actually, as we are on that topic, so Partha, we have one question for you. A question is to explain some challenging expressions and words you have faced, like in translation.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually the very next ghazal we'll be talking about that a little bit, because that's because it's a translation of a ghazal, and I think that translating a ghazal is particularly tricky and difficult. So I think we can come to that question just through the next ghazal. Yeah. So I mean, we were speaking about how in the previous poem there was the exception that was there. And yet there are times when there are no exceptions, when one can't find beauty in an event. And one such time was when violence broke out in Delhi, India's capital, recently, with thousands displaced and tens of people killed. Manan was asked by Saranga, an online multilingual platform and publishing house celebrating Telugu writing, to respond to the crisis. And I would like to invite him to read the ghazal that this produced. The title is Kahan se laaye jigar naya hum.
Right. Yeah, like Partha said, this was responding to the Delhi riots, particularly the burning of a lot of Muslim homes there and bringing down of mosques. And there's a particular share which I will refer to that I wrote specifically for addressing the Indian Muslims. But anyhow, so I'll read the ghazal. It's called Kahan se laaye jigar naya hum. बाहर का दिल दुखा दिया है, विसाल हमने गवा दिया है. कहां से लाएं जिगर नया हम, जिगर को खून में डुबा दिया है. अब खुश्क आंसू तरस रहा है, वफा को ऐसा रुला दिया है. And this is the share that I wrote for the Indian Muslims, that going through that particularly in Delhi. किधर को निकलें ये तेरे आशिक, किधर को निकलें ये तेरे आशिक, शहर को तूने जला दिया है. अलम कहां से वो लफ्ज लाएं, कहें कहां क्या लुटा दिया है.
Where shall I find a new heart now? This wound has wounded spring now. Our concord is laid to waste now. This heart of mine has drowned in blood. Where shall I find a new heart now? What shall sate the thirst of my tears? Faith sobs inconsolable now. What roads can the lovers take? For you have burnt our city now. Alam, where are the words to say? Where, how, and what I have lost now?
It's wonderful. So, Partha, I think we should couple the questions. One that Aisha conveyed that someone asked, and also one the experience of translation, and the other is this particular ghazal. I think was quite wonderful, and I know that Atif really liked this ghazal and the translation particularly of the ghazal, because and me too. I think what you've done in this ghazal is very interesting in terms of the technicalities of translation, because as for people who speak Urdu in the audience or Hindi in the audience, you know that the tense is a little tricky tense that is used, but you have used the word now, a highly temporal word, to really, I think, get to the, it's a different access that you've not used one of the grammar of English to rely so as to translate that, but instead use the word now, and I think that has really come through. So I just wanted for you to explain that choice a little bit, and then also answer the question that Aisha asked.
Yeah. When it comes to the technicalities of translation, I think the ghazal really brings a lot of these questions to fore, because it's such a mature form of poetry, right? I mean, it's such skilled people have practiced it and have really exploited its form so cleverly. And the big challenge of translating ghazals into English is, of course, that Urdu or Hindustani has this resource, right, where certain phrases often end sentences very naturally in the language. So as a result, the ghazal's frame of using a refrain, of the first couplet repeating the refrain twice and the subsequent couplets, replicating that refrain in the second line each time.
Right.
That's a resource that Hindustani and Urdu, have within the language itself. But English doesn't really have that at all. We are not ending on a hai, we are not ending on verbs, we are not ending in a way that... So really, the ability to capture that refrain is the question that I put to myself when translating this ghazal. And the tense actually helped me, right? So I saw that, okay, we are in the present perfect tense, which is a tense which captures an event that has just happened and whose effects are very, very alive right now. Right, it's the lingering after effect of something that has already happened, which this ghazal lives in, and that's what made me pick now as one of the options for the refrain. I had some 15 or 20 options. And then when I thought more about the now, I also realized that there is an additional resource in English that now actually captures some of the tonal variations that you have in the ghazal. So now can be an accusation, like now what have you done, you know, or now can express grief and helplessness, like what should I do now, you know, now what can I do about this? And so I really can't promise being able to come up with a solution like this every time. And in fact, in the other ghazal, if you noticed, I haven't used a refrain at all. You know, I've cheated. What I've used is assonance.
Right.
So what I'm doing is I'm losing all the playfulness, you know, that ghazal writers use. Each refrain, each use of the refrain is subtly different from the other, and that's one of the pleasures of the ghazal. But in English, I've had to abandon the refrain. But assonance, which I feel is actually one of the resources that English has. So these near rhymes where I don't have to stick to a strict rhyme scheme, but still I have this pattern, this beautiful kind of unity, you know. You know, there's this kind of music in the language, which English I feel has as a resource, and I've tried to use that to translate the ghazal. So.
Yeah, and honestly, it's you know, what you've done with it is what you put your finger on as you're explaining this is actually the flexibility when you're dealing with forms and translation. I think that's very important. What you step, you know, sometimes we can force the refrain in English, but sometimes, you know, different ghazals will attract different kinds of translatory practices, and so I feel the flexibility that you said, you know, you did it for one, but you didn't do it for the other. But this flexibility, I think, it adds to the translator's sort of toolkit. That you don't have a hard and fast rule, but you go on a ghazal by ghazal basis, which I personally would, you know, prefer that. So that's very good to know.
Yeah. And I also wanted to add, you know, I love the refrain of now. And also this refrain makes this into ghazal in English. So for me, Agha Shahid Ali comes to mind. So.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And Agha, you know, I in fact, there's archival evidence that I texted him and I said, you know, this quite sounds like Agha Sahib. It was
right?
Because there's the famous one, God sobs in my arms, call me Ishmael tonight. You know, there was this, so that it immediately reminded me of the tonight use of in the refrain in that beautiful leather. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, of course. Yeah,
absolutely indebted to Agha Sahib and totally undeserving of the comparison, but yes. I did want to speak about a Kaifi Azmi poem as well, because you know, I mean, there's the whole question of the Delhi riots, and in a sense there's a timely quality to this poem that you responded to this event. But we also know that poetry has a timeless quality in a sense. But I don't know if we have time for the Kaifi Azmi poem, which was written in the 1950s, but which speaks to the current crisis with the migrant workers in India, who suddenly find themselves without food and without shelter during the lockdown, the pandemic lockdown. And in the 1950s, Kaifi Sahib wrote a poem which actually speaks about these workers staring longingly at the houses that they themselves have built, and which they are now outside of, and they are forced to face the elements, etc. You know, and that's just something that's replicating itself right now. So I don't think we'll go into Kaifi Saab's poem. It's Makan for whoever wants to look at it. I can post a link.
Copy paste in the chat. We can paste the
yeah, we can paste the link. But regarding this timeless quality, right? And I felt that one of the things that could be at work is that, so in English we have references of one poem refers to other poems, but Urdu I find is much more promiscuous. You know, they're happy to borrow images, symbols, sometimes entire lines, and there's a lot of this kind of intermixing and interplay that happens. And in your poem as well, the very first line, Bahar ka dil dukha diya, invokes spring, which is obviously has this rich, resonant kind of tradition in Urdu poetry. Do you think you have used that library in order to, make your poem transcend, this particular event that you were writing about?
Yeah, entirely. I mean, this has come more as a student and reader of the ghazal, Urdu, and now recently Persian also. This is it is basically, these are all broadly metapoetic statements, because it's just how do we engage with writing poetry, and how do you engage with writing poetry. And I think I had in the piece that we co-wrote, there was that line, दिलों के नगमे सुना रहे हैं, शम्मों से शम्मे जला रहे हैं. So I have actually in a way answered the question that poetry to me is singing the songs of the heart and lighting candles with candles, because that's what how poetry occurs to me. I don't see my poetry as original, honestly, because it's hard to see any poetry as original in that sense, because the language exists, and you have stock images. Now the thing is how you can perhaps distance yourself from it and try and create a second language, which is what a lot of, let's say, modernist poets have tried to do. But I take refuge in the tradition, in the literary tradition. So I take refuge. I'm not that brave. So I simply take refuge, and then it also, to me personally, really, it marks a certain presence of the poets that I admire and that I really respect. And then it seems to me that this is worthy of sharing. So there is in a way, it's like there is a certain presence there's a certain trace of their presence, which these particular symbols and images, whether it's Bahar or whether it's Tafas or whether it's the spring or the jail cell or wine, that truly helps me. One, of course, think about. And there's also an aesthetic relationship with these images that I personally have, just because certain emotions that I want to, or that I feel like putting in the poem, or accessing through the poem, really, or feeling through the poem that I'm writing, they occur through these symbols. It is because it is the language I know, and here I'm not referring to Urdu as a language, but it is the language of emotion, of the register of emotions that I know. So I access that.
Yeah. I think we can move on to the next poem, which is the last poem of the day, and it's really about what you mentioned earlier about future time, because clearly one of the resources that we have to deal with the present is this imagination of a future that we are working towards and building towards. And so the poem is called Chand Tere Naam Ka.
So I'll read the poem and then we'll briefly discuss it before we take further questions. Chand Tere Naam Ka. चांद निकलेगा हर एक बाम पर तेरे ही नाम का, इन रात के सायों से बहुत दूर रंग बदलेगा ऐ जान बेरंग शाम का, और रात के सुरमे को सवारेगा अबद तक, ठहरा हुआ वो अश्क वफा तेरे नाम का. फिर क्यों मेरे हमदम जुदाई से डरे हम, इस रात चलो रात भर को बात करें हम, उन पुरकशिश यादों को चलो याद करें हम, एक शौक की आतिश तो फरोजा ही कर चलें, एक ख्वाब सा सीने में मुनव्वर तो करें हम. फिर नूर से फूटेगा उस फरदा का उजाला, जिसके लबों पे नाम है तेरे ही नाम का, रंग बदलेगा कभी बेरंग शाम का, चांद निकलेगा ऐ जान तेरे ही नाम का.
वाह मनान.
Thank you. बहुत शुक्रिया. बहुत.
A moon in your name. A moon will peep over every parapet, and moonlight everywhere will speak your name. Far from the reach of night's long shadows, An infusion of color will swell our darkling world. The tears I have shed in your name will kindle night's black coal for eons. Memories will tease us into quiet intimacies. Why then, beloved, should we fear separation? Tonight is the night we will talk all night long. Look, the glow of hope becomes a conflagration. Our dream lights up the corners of our hearts. That dawn which cannot stop whispering your name turns incandescent in the blaze of our hearts. An infusion of color will swell our darkling world. A moon will peep over every parapet, and moonlight everywhere will speak your name.
Oh my God, beautiful, Partha. Thank you so much. Beautiful.
Thanks. You know, I am always in a fix whenever Partha reads, because there's rarely you can ever even offer an edit. I mean, I'm always in a daze, but then I can't even do the wah because then, you know, I'm like, am I indulging in some sort of vanity that, you know, he's translated? So is this, I'm always, so I basically have resorted to saying that these are Partha's poems. And then I can give him all the praise. But this is, and if I may ask a question before we wrap up about this is, and more broadly, not about the poem, but about the experience of translation, because I know some people wanted to know more about Partha's basically engagement. Partha, what does a translator? You know, we often hear, you know, things are always lost in translation, and then Rushdie said, well, things are always also gained in translation. So there's always the focus on the translation, but what about the translator? What does the translator gain or lose when engaging? You know, it's a hefty task. I know the kind of work that Partha puts in. It's the translator has a lot of labor that translators do a lot of labor. And what is that labor like, and what does it give to and take away from a translator?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of gain and loss, and the gain is so much easier to answer. So I'll start with the gain, certainly. One is that I feel that translation is probably the most intimate way to encounter a poem. So you really get into it, and then you put it in a different language, and it just opens up the poem in ways that I don't think any other way of accessing a poem does. So if anyone is bilingual and they really are in love with the poem, I think a great way to get even closer to it is to actually translate it into the other language that you know. The other gain, and this has to do with craft, right? I think that as a translator, I get to practice my craft with your ideas, and this brings to mind an anecdote that I heard actually about W.S. Merwin, who was such a senior translator and who passed away fairly recently. And I was at a panel discussion which was in memoriam of W.S. Merwin, which mentioned an anecdote that when Merwin was 16 or 18 years old, you know, just starting out, a teenage poet, he happened to meet Ezra Pound and asked him for advice. What do I do to become a poet? And Ezra Pound said, to become a poet, you have to write poetry. You have to write so many lines every day. But of course, you're only 16 or 18 years old, so there's nothing that you know that you can write poems about. You don't know anything that well. So the thing that you should do is you should translate. And Mervyn really took that advice to heart, and I think he has some 20 volumes in translation across 12 languages or something. And of course, he had his own flourishing kind of poetic career. So certainly that, you know, I just get to ride off on your insights, on your ideas, and just craft them in this particular way. So I get to practice craft without having to also think about, you know, the other ideas, and without having to come up with something new per se. So those are two things that we gain. In terms of loss, I can't think of a loss, but I can think of a danger, maybe. And the danger, I think, lies in a translator or even an editor, for instance, forming a self-conception of themselves as being only a translator or only an editor. So that fear of forgetting that you have your own voice and that you have your own expression, and I think as long as people guard against that and people see themselves as agents and see their work and their expression as also important, because I feel it's such a human endeavor, right? I mean, art should not be professionalized, should not be left to the professionals at all. I mean, I don't think any of us can live without art and without practicing art, whether it's cooking or dancing or whatever, however we express ourselves. And so long as the translator doesn't fall into that trap, it's a beautiful thing, right? Like Mervyn, the translation feeds into the work and the work feeds back into the translation, and you have a virtuous cycle going. So yeah.
And sometimes when I read your translations, or for that matter, any other translations, even in my own research, sometimes you see that that there is that there are some aspects and dimensions of a poem that open through that translation, right? It's maybe something that the poet perhaps had in the poem at least seem suppressed, seem distant, or there's some distancing. The translator can bring them up, and then you can revel in that translation, which has basically shed, almost a literal light on a certain, or helped a buried meaning, outside the ruble of, let's say, the dominant readings of a certain.
Yeah, and I want to say that honestly, I mean, this entire kind of view of translation or even of art as something that belongs to the people was not how I started. I still remember, I actually also met Manan at a protest. He spoke, and then later I got in touch with him and saying I wanted to hear his poems. And then Manan said, would you like to translate them? And I immediately said no, because the culture, the Anglophone literary tradition that I come from, is really obsessed with these questions of fidelity and questions of originality and who owns the poem, who has the copyright, etc. But Manan immediately said that, honestly, if my poems spark something new in you, then that's something that I welcome. That's how poetry works, because I myself have taken the flame from someone else. And I think Rumi has a poem about this. He says that this is how music happens, that I strike a chord and then that chord is replicated in your heart and then you pass it on to someone else. And I think Rumi has a lovely little poem which speaks of exactly this. So in sum, I think even Anglophone literary culture can learn a lot from the Urdu tradition and the way it operates. Yeah.
So it's 6:23. We have 7 minutes, but before we go to audience, and I just wanted to I have unmuted all of our audience participants through Instagram, through Zoom. So please let me know if you have any questions. But before we go to audience, I have a question. Actually, I was making notes while you both were talking. So speaking of translations, we have many different types and results, right? Some are flat prose, like lengthy prose kind of translations. Then some are poetic and fairly true to original pathos, Partha, literally what you did. And then there are those like Coleman Burke's of translating Rumi to create something completely different. So, as a relationship between Manan, you and Partha, like where both of you think that, I know there is not a simple answer, and you have answered pretty much all of that during our conversation, but where do you think a successful translation lies? As a poet, because, and then as a I would really like to know briefly how you think about that.
Yeah. One of the things I think Manan and I were discussing this about how language should not be thought of as a mechanical instrument. I feel, it's not that I'm taking from one language and then I'm putting it through a machine and it comes out through the other language. I feel that a translation works better if we take the other meaning of medium, which is the occult meaning of someone who channels something, and embodies it and then speaks in that voice. So for me, poetry especially is so much about spirit, and it has to be that, it has to be that I have to. So for me, a successful translation is one that is possessed by the original poem and then produces it. And I'm very lucky that I have a living poet who can tell me that, no, this is not what I meant at all, and someone who's so proficient in English as well. So that's how I like to think of it. I don't know, it's a fuzzy answer, but I don't think there is any. I think to programmatize it or to systematize it would actually be unpoetic in some ways. I think as soon as we resort to a tool that we have already used before, we are already moving away from poetry into something else.
I think it's a great answer, and especially possessed is a great expression, because that's what I felt both time when when Manan was speaking and then when you were speaking. Absolutely.
I just wanted to add just a little bit, and Partha basically answered what I wanted to. So he even translated before I even said it. But one thing I want to add about particularly Partha's translations and the reason and my relationship with him and his translations is that I was telling him, he gets the mizaj of the poem. The mizaj, now the mizaj is hard to translate. Should we call it affect? Should we call it mood? Because there's something very important to the mood of the ghazal, and the mood carries the meaning. So, it's not that. So he gets it immediately, and another important broadly about translator poet kind of relationship is what is the nature of that relationship? What is the sincerity in that relationship? The poet could be living or dead, but there is always I recently someone asked me, do you have an ustad? Basically, do you have a teacher? So in Urdu poetry, you have to have some formal teacher. I said, well, I have Faiz Ahmad Faiz, but he's not alive. So there is and I just understand these relationships of poets and teachers in terms of the sincerity, in terms of what is it, and meeting Partha for the first time was the reason I asked him was because it was a very different moment for me. I had met him for the first time, and this was the first time, first time actually anyone in America quoted exactly 4 lines from my poem, which was my first poem, and it was exactly correct. And then he told me that he had used that to send to a friend who was going through a tough time, and the nature of that chain and the context in which he had used it was, I immediately thought that he gets it. He gets what particularly the words are suppressing or hiding or not entirely saying, but he's getting that. I mean, he's articulating that, and so that was a big moment for me, and that relationship of the sincerity of the relationship. And then just on the sounds, my advisor, Dr. Ilyas, says a brilliant thing about translation and about how to understand language. We were reading Persian, and he said, you have to listen. Don't just, go after what you think it's going to mean. Listen to the word. So it's almost genius to, and then it really helps because you actually should listen to the word. And when you listen to the word, they will open up many, many meanings on you.
Mm-hmm.
And that was his Dr. Ilyas's suggestion to approach this. And so that I really think about that even in terms of translation. So you actually should listen to the words, right? And I think Partha really does that, as we saw from his translation.
This is beautiful. Thank you so much, both. So we would like to open it to audience. Again, all of you are unmuted from our side. Please let us know if you have any questions. Okay, we have Vivian Wen. I know you have a question, so please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, I'm Vivian. Hi, Partha. We met at a translation conference. I have a question to both of you. I really admire the humility of both of you, your modesty, and how we're all indebted to the language, and how it's never about the artist's ego, But I'm just wondering if there are any instances where you fear that your ego might get in the way of the practice of art, and if yes, how did you deal with that? Thank you.
Partha, do you want to answer that first? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, I find that if ego does enter, then, and I may be lucky or unlucky in this aspect, it's as if I can't write really. If if I start worrying too much about how this work reflects on me, then it becomes harder for me to operate and to write. So art just feels safer to do, and the product is better if I can remove myself from the process somewhat. So yeah, so in that sense, I'm always monitoring for the ego and trying to eliminate it. Yeah.
I frankly, I have to say that, and thank you for the question, Vivian. It's a wonderful question. For me, I just have to read the poets that have on my bookshelf, and that humbles me. Like there is, you read the poets, and then you realize, this is sometimes it really occurs to me that if one has to write, one should write like that, or I shouldn't even bother. There are thoughts that these are kind of dark thoughts. They come to me though, because it's just so my humility comes from just looking at the elders in my tradition, and then that is just and then any sense of the I inflating is immediately curtailed. So I would say that it's really just reading things, reading more and more poets, and the poets that I write like, and reading them again and again, you realize that this is you're dealing with skies after skies, as there's no last sky, so to speak, in that sense. So you can never say that okay, I have arrived. At least to me, it doesn't even occur. Yeah.
Thank you. It's very precious. Thank you both.
Thank you, Vivian. So we can take one more question.
Great.
Okay, any comments from anyone?
I just wanted to congratulate, this is Mir, Manan.
Hi, Mir.
How are you? That was
How are you?
it's lovely to hear your poetry recited by you, because often I hear your poetry recited by Jamal, and that's great. But it's wonderful to hear.
So much for insulting someone in a backhanded way. Anyway.
It's something else hearing a poet recite their own poetry. And Partha, I just wanted to congratulate you and your wonderful translations. As a fellow Bengali, I'm really, really proud of that, translating from Urdu and etc. But really happy we'll look you up, really happy to have made this, gotten to know you through this process. So thank you both for your time. You really filled our evening today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mir. Thank you, Jamal.
Thank you so much, Mir. Thank you, Jamal. And I'm not sure, Manan and Partha, if you know Mir and Jamal. Jamal, of course, is on advisory board. Mir is one of our founding board members of 12 Kids.
Unfortunately, Manan knows me quite well.
I know, right? I know from 12 Gates history, but we have one question from Instagram real quick. And I know it's dinner time, and I really appreciate everybody's hanging out with us through Instagram, Facebook, and through Zoom. Can you speak about your Takhallus Alam?
Oh, the Takhallus Alam. Yes. So the Takhallus Alam came about in December, and it was a friend of mine who actually suggested to me, a friend I value very much, and we were sitting, and I had been thinking about the takhallus, of what the takhallus that I should keep. Manan, I thought, but Manan was too long. It was simply metrically, it was taking too much space, and so that wasn't working. and then I didn't want to force one. So I actually wrote my first 2 poems without a takallus. There's no takallus in them. I read a mushaira without a takallus, a poetry reading in London without a takallus. So then we were sitting through and basically we were listening to a poem, a ghazal by Faiz, and he used the word, there's a ghazal in which he uses the word alam, which means a banner. Well, in the modern times it can mean a flag, but it really means a banner, or it means something under which people coalesce, basically. So it's also part of the Shia imagery and of the alam al-Hussein, al-Maqat. So there's sort of this dual meaning to it. It's quite an old word, and so there's a lot of that. And then in that conversation, when we were listening, she said, I recall in your first poem you had used the word alam. Why don't you say alam? I think it's a good one. And it was short. It was, and it came from a very good friend of mine. So I thought that was, and it's basically, it's the birth of that moment was through Faiz's ghazal. So I thought it was all coming together.
Coming in together.
All coming in together, and then I decided to go with alam, which is the ain lam mim alam.
Thank you so much. And Jamal, special thank you to you for introducing Manan to us, to bringing Manan to our life. And Manan, to you, Partha.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Aisha, and thank you so much, Adit. But I also have to thank Dr. Ilyas because Jamal, because it's just, being in a graduate program, he's really encouraged me. I remember the first time my poem was about to be published, I showed it to him, he encouraged me, and then going for readings and things like that. So I should also thank him because, it's very important that his support is there. And then he makes me meet people like Aisha and Atif. So that's another
a pleasure and an honor.
Oh my.
And for all of us, and beautiful comments, very enjoyable hour. Hope we do it again from one of our friends and board member Stinky as well. So just wanted to let you know, we really need to do this over and over again. I don't know how we make that happen, but I think we do need to do these art programs, these poetry readings more, especially until we don't know, right? But what I am walking away with today, possessed and listening, these 2 words really, I think, made sense to me. I don't know how I'm gonna, from tomorrow, every day I get up and I'm like, okay, how I will start my day and I do look for 9:30 when I really can sleep because I'm an early sleeper and nobody bugs me anymore. And so that's really working well for me. But Partha, Manan, and all of you who really came to attend this event. I wish I could see you all, but thank you so much. And it was beautiful and perfect. And Partha, whenever you come to Philly, you have friends here and you have to make sure you let us know when you're here.
Yeah.
And Manan, all of you stay well. Hopefully, we will see each other, all of us, in person.
Wonderful.
Inshallah.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.